Hi, David Finkel here, CEO of Maui Mastermind. And what I want to talk today is I want to give you a peek into one of my most favorite books that I read. I read this book about 3.5, 4 years ago. Actually, I didn't read it. I listened to it. It was an Audible book that I did. And many of the books that I do, I read. Others I'll listen to. And this is one that I really got a lot from. Of all the different books on hiring that I've listened to or read over the years, this is probably my 1 or 2 top favorite of all of them. The book is called Who? The A Method for Hiring. And it was written by 2 gentlemen, Geoff Smart and Randy Street. And they did a fantastic job. They run an executive search company, and they're experts in this area. And the book is full of all kinds of great stuff. Now, I'm not going to give you a summary of the book. I'm not going to give a critique of the book. As a fellow author, I wouldn't do that. Instead, what I'm going to do is I want to share with you the 2 big ideas that I pulled from the book. So I've actually read it through twice. I've listened to it through twice. I've recommended it to probably 50 or more of our business coaching clients that have had troubles or challenges in hiring great talent for their companies. And the advice has proved sound. So this is not theory that they're talking about. It's stuff that in practice works well. And so the first idea that I pulled from the book, we'll talk about this first big idea, which is in hiring, how are you creating yourself, we'll call this a farm system. I'm going to make an analogy here. Now, this is not their language, but it's their idea that they really prompted or sparked. The idea of a farm system versus just going off and making a one-off hire. You know, when I thought about what they said, and I looked at my career, for 20 years, probably how I did hiring was, I have a need, I go out and place ads or work with a recruiter, and I make the hire. Then I have the next need, and I think strategically about how I find this person, how do I source them. But something they said in the book made a really big difference to me. They said that the very best CEOs, they're always on the lookout for talent. And that struck me. I thought to myself about, think about Major League Baseball. One thing they do extraordinarily well is they have this system of having a farm club where they have talent at various stages of development, so that when they need a player, they've already identified a pool of people, whether they need someone for this role or for that role, they can pluck out from their network. Their network doesn't just include the great players who are in development, but they also include the people who could scout or find other talent. And this is something that was really interesting when I read that. And so here's how it really impacted me. The first thing is I recognize I am always hiring. And this is true. When I look at the clients that we work with on the coaching side, there's a reason why they're growing 5 times faster than the average probably whole company. One of the things is, as they're growing, they've gotten really good at spotting and developing talent. You're always hiring. You know, one of our clients runs a financial services company. I was talking with this guy. His name happens to be David as well. And so for in his business, the number one limiting factor is finding great junior wealth advisors, people that have a few years' experience, but haven't been ruined by the industry, so he can train them the way that he wants. And he needs really sharp, driven people, high degree of integrity, but he doesn't want them to have had 30 years of experience in the industry, because then they're going to do it their way, not his company's way. And so this idea of a farm system for him made him recognize that he's always hiring. And the next piece for this is he really needs to invest. We call this play the long game. I'm going to give you an example from his business. And I'll give you one from mine, the long game. What does this mean? So if I'm always on the rule of hiring, well, when he used to go to conferences for his financial services world, he would go hang out with the other people who owned large or mid-sized financial advisory firms. And they would share ideas. They would laugh and joke about the vagaries of running a business. I challenged him. I said, David, what are you doing on that here? You tell me that your number one constraint to growth is having regular people who come in young and fresh in your world. Why aren't you in the breakout sessions? Why aren't you meeting with the people that are the pool that you want to hire from versus these other owners that, I get it if you want to maybe later on do a third acquisition to grow your company, that might make sense. But the moment I said it, he got a light bulb. Just like when I read this in the book, I got a light bulb that went off. And I realized for me, I have to play the long game, which means I'm always in the role of hiring or looking for and sourcing talent. Now here's the part with building a farm system. I'm not going to have them work in one of my junior companies. However, the farm system is other people's businesses. They're on someone else's payroll, but as long as I strategically invest and keep that relationship vital, keep nourishing that relationship, Maybe it's a phone call 6 or 8 months down the road. Maybe it's an email I sent out. Maybe it's a card a little bit. But 2, 3 touches in the course of a year just to keep that relationship real. A meal we share, maybe. It's amazing. So I'll share with you how it worked in my business. We recently were looking for 2 more sales hires for our company. And this is pretty typical, that as we've continued to grow, we try to eat our own cooking, and we've grown, we need to make different hires. And so on the sales hire, there's a guy that I thought was just right for the role. We'll call this person B. Doesn't matter who he is, but we'll call this person B. And he was great. He had went through a couple rounds of earlier interviews. I was on that last interview, and we wanted him. We really did. But as we got to that part, though, his earlier company he was currently working for basically pulled out all the stops. They realized that if they lost their best salesperson, they were going to be up the creek without a paddle. So they threw a ton of money at this guy. So much money so that it was out of line for what his market value was. And essentially, he took the offer. And I understand that. I don't blame him for it. B was smart to take that for his young family. He needed to. Now, in the past, what would I have done? I would have said, next. But after reading this book, after really hearing what they said, what I realized was I had just found someone who was really talented. And if I'm going to play the long game with this person, we'll call him B, how do I keep that relationship going? I mean, think about it. I saw his resume. He had been with no one company for more than 3 years. What that meant is 3 years from now, I knew we were going to need another salesperson. I knew it. Probably even sooner than that. But when I look for him, keep the relationship open. Who knows what's going to happen in 6 months or in 2 years? Keep the relationship open. And even if B never works for us, you know what? Because that relationship would be vital and vibrant, he becomes a talent scout that can help source someone else. Because birds of a feather flock together. Strong, or in the words of Geoff and Randy in the book, AP players flock together. A players know other A players. So think about this. Every time you go to hire, you're going to find some great people eventually. Some of the people might not say yes to work with you because they have a different opportunity that feels more compelling. How can you keep that relationship whole and vibrant, even if you're not going to hire them right there, so that down the road, playing the long game, you can reach back out to them and think, hey, we have another opening here right now. And here's the thing. You're not like you're going to be stealing them from someone else, although that's nothing wrong with that either. However, B, 2, 3 years from today, I know what's going to happen. He's working for a company that threw a ton of money at him because he was their number one salesperson. And they were scrambling. They're going to feel very vulnerable when he was about to leave, and so they're going to work really hard to basically backfill what B can do and replicate that in other people. They're going to work really hard at that because they don't want to have that vulnerability. They're going to want more strategic depth. And here's what I've learned about compensation. You can never get it exactly right, but if I'm not in the right neighborhood with conversation, I don't have to be in the perfect house, but if I'm not in the right neighborhood, where either I'm paying too much or the person's receiving too little, if we're not in alignment that we both feel that we're in the right neighborhood, that won't last. So chances are B is going to be looking for something else here down the road pretty quickly. Maybe in 6 months, but certainly within the next 2 or 3 years. Certainly within that high degree of certainty about that. So why wouldn't I keep that relationship going? Again, before I read the book, I would have just tossed it in the shredder pile and wished him well and certainly wished him the very best going forward, but I wouldn't have paid attention. So now I'm going to keep that relationship there. I'll give one more example of how this works. So one of the other clients who work with Thomas, he runs a manufacturing company. And he wanted a really good line manager, and he had found this guy at a particular industry show. But the guy was very loyal to his current place, and so what Thomas did, he said, I understand that. No problem at all. Just keep in touch. And so he would go meet him for a beer here, or would reach out by phone 5, 6 months later, just to kind of keep that going. There will be a day that this person will probably work for our client. Why? Because that relationship invested in over time, it's kind of like nurturing a pipeline in sales. It will, if you're playing the long game and put numbers behind it, pay off hugely for you in the long run. So that's the first big idea that the book gave me. It's probably the most valuable idea from a big picture perspective. There's a second thing that I took from the book, and it was a really interesting frame. It was how to actually do references. How to use references both in the interview process and also to pull out the accurate, real information for the reference. So here's what they said in the book, and it was just really right on. The next interview I did after that, I used their method, and it just, boom, it worked. So what they said is when you're talking with the person doing your interview, and you're going through one of the interviews, they talk about 4 different types of interviews in the book, but one of them is going through their resume, kind of in reverse order. And so, for example, go back to that sales hire, and I might say to the person, hey, John, who was your direct manager there when you were working at Acme Inc.? And he says, Paul. I said, what's Paul's last name? Jones. Okay, spell that for me. And I do it so that he knows that I'm writing down the name. Great. When I talk with Paul, what's he going to share with me as, notice I didn't say if I were to talk with, I say when I talk with Paul and I ask him about the places of your greatest contribution or strengths, what's he going to tell me? Got it. Write them down. Now on the flip side, when I talk with Paul, what's he going to say back then? Again, listen to the language. It was straight from the book. It's brilliant languaging. What's he going to tell me that back then were the things that for you that you really needed to grow and develop on? Again, by using that frame of back then, it makes it much easier for the person to open up. And maybe, John says something like, well, he's going to say that I was still a little bit shy about being on the phone. Sometimes I was a little bit call reluctant back then, 10 years ago at that other job, 3 jobs ago. So now what happens at the end, this is also brilliant. I get John to make sure that he coordinates or helps me reach out to these people. Maybe even I ask his help to even set up a call. Speed up that process so that the person's expecting me with that part. And when I talk to the reference, in this case Paul, I say, Paul, how are you? When I was talking with John earlier, he said that one of the things you might say was that he had a little bit of call shyness or call reluctance. Does that ring true for you? So the fact that I can report back to what Paul said, to what John said to Paul, and the fact that I can frame it as, he said you might say, now I find that I can ask the references, well, what else would you? And it's almost like they feel like the floodgates have been opened and that they have tacit permission to share the real scoop. I will tell you, 10 years ago, I didn't do that. I would ask questions like, well, tell me if you were me, would you hire him? Or what would you wish someone would have told you about this person? And I've found universally that almost everyone that was a reference on there, they gave me a bland reference or they gave a strong reference. No one really said the real stuff. But when I did it this way as framed in the book, it just worked. I finally had people who were sharing, well, actually that's true. He really did have quite a bit of call reluctance, and I don't know if they ever got over that. And it hurt his performance there. And I get the straight story. So for me, having read the book twice, these are the two things that I pull from it. And probably they're 6 to 7 figure ideas for my company. When I look at the different clients that I've now pushed these ideas into and how they've used it, probably they're replicated again. So I really encourage you to get the book. This is what I pulled from it. Who knows, maybe you'll pull something completely different. It was a rich book that had lots of great ideas. So I hope that you found some good ideas here that you can do. These are the 2 big ideas that I took. I wish you the very best in your role of building a business and scaling your company.